The first thing I remember was her left shoe falling into the river. The second was my little boy screaming against my chest. And the third was realizing I had one hand to save two lives. I had never seen that young woman before. I did not know her name, where she came from, or why she was standing on the wrong side of the Manhattan Bridge railing at nearly 1 in the morning. All I knew was that the rain had turned the steel slick as oil and her fingers were sliding through mine. "Do not let go," I shouted, though honestly I could not tell whether I was talking to her, to myself, or to God. My name is Darius Reed, and back then, I was 36 years old, a black single father with $42 in my checking account, a bad knee, and a 3-year-old son named Micah, who believed I could fix anything because I once repaired the wheel on his toy dump truck with duct tape and a bread clip. That was the kind of reputation I had in my household. One tiny customer, very generous reviews. I was not a hero. I was not looking for trouble. And I definitely was not prepared to become the last thing standing between a stranger and the East River. I had just finished a 12-hour shift unloading restaurant supplies at a warehouse near Chinatown. The kind of job where nobody asks about your dreams because everyone is too busy protecting their backs. Micah's babysitter called around 10 saying her daughter was sick, so I picked him up and carried him home under my coat, planning to cross the bridge, catch the late bus, and pray the landlord had not finally shut off our heat. The rain came sideways that night, sharp and cold, and the wind pushed against us so hard I had to lean forward just to keep moving. Micah was asleep against my chest, one worn cheek pressed to my collarbone, while I counted the money in my head for the 4th or 5th time. Rent, daycare, milk, cough medicine, and maybe enough left over for the laundromat if I skipped lunch for a few days. That was when I saw her. At first she looked like part of the bridge, just a pale shape beyond the railing. Her white dress snapping in the wind, dark hair stuck across her face. I slowed down because my mind did not want to understand what my eyes were seeing. Then she lifted one foot onto the lower beam, and every tired thought in my head disappeared. "Hey," I called. She did not move. I stepped closer. "Ma'am, you need to come back over." She turned slightly, and even from 20 feet away I could see there was nothing calm in her expression. People like to describe that kind of face as peaceful. But it was not peaceful. It was exhausted. It was the look of someone who had been fighting a private war so long she had forgotten what winning was supposed to feel like. "Stay back," she said. Her voice was almost swallowed by the wind. I raised my free hand. "Okay, I am staying right here." That was a lie. I kept moving, one slow step at a time. "What is your name?" "It does not matter." "It matters to somebody." She gave this little laugh that had no humor in it. "You do not know anything about me." "That is true," I said. "I also do not know how to cook rice without burning the bottom, but my son keeps giving me chances." Micah stirred beneath my coat, then let out a soft complaint. The woman looked toward the sound. For 1 second, something changed in her eyes. It was small, almost nothing. But when you have spent enough nights watching a child breathe because you were afraid life might take one more thing from you, you learn to notice small changes. "You have a child," she said. "Yeah, and he is going to be very annoyed if I let us stand in this rain much longer. Then go home." "I will, but I would feel better if you came back to this side first." Her jaw tightened. "You cannot fix this. I am not trying to fix your whole life. I'm trying to get you through the next 60 seconds. She turned away, looking down at the black water. I moved closer, 10 feet, then 8. "Please," I said. "Whatever happened, it can still be there tomorrow. You do not have to solve it tonight. Tomorrow is the problem." "Sometimes it is," I said. "But it is also the only place things can change." That was when her foot slipped. There was no dramatic pause, no warning music, no graceful movement, just the scrape of her bare foot against wet steel and a short, terrified sound that came from somewhere deeper than language. Her body dropped. I lunged forward, slammed my right knee into the railing, and caught her wrist with my left hand. The force nearly pulled Micah out of my coat. He woke screaming, his little hands clawing at my shirt while the woman swung over open air. Pain shot through my knee so hard I saw sparks. My shoulder felt like it was being torn from the socket. "Hold on," I yelled. "Let me go," she gasped. "No, you are going to fall." "Then stop making this harder." That might sound cruel, but fear does not always make people eloquent. Sometimes it makes you angry because anger is easier to carry than panic. I hooked my elbow around the railing and pressed Micah tighter against my body. The woman's fingers were cold, almost numb, and I could feel them slipping millimeter by millimeter. Below us, the river churned beneath the rain. "Listen to me," I said. "My boy is right here. I cannot lose my grip with him watching, so you are going to help me." "I cannot. You can move 1 foot. There is nothing under me. There is a steel brace 6 inches to your right. Find it." She shook her head violently. "I am tired. I know. No, you do not. My wife died in an apartment fire 4 years ago," I said. The words coming out rough and fast. I spent 8 minutes outside that building, listening to windows break while somebody held me back. I know what it is to want the world to stop, because continuing feels like betrayal. I know what it is to wake up angry that morning came anyway. Rain ran down her face. Or maybe tears did, I could not tell. "Then why are you still here?" she asked. I looked down at Micah. His face was twisted with fear, his eyes fixed on me. "Because he was still here," I said. At first that was the only reason. Then one day I laughed at something stupid on television and felt guilty about it. Then I laughed again the next week. And eventually I understood that surviving was not the same as forgetting her. The woman's arm trembled. "I have nobody. You have me for the next minute. You do not even know me. Then tell me your name." She closed her eyes. "Claire." "Okay, Claire, I am Darius. And the small person trying to remove my buttons is Micah. Now find that brace." I lowered myself carefully, ignoring the heat building in my knee. The bridge shook beneath passing traffic on the upper level. Claire moved her right foot, missed the brace, and cried out. "Again," I said. "I cannot. You can hate me after you are safe. I already hate you." "Good. Use it." Her foot scraped along the steel until her toes found the narrow beam. "I have it. Push when I say." I needed both hands, and that meant putting Micah down. Every part of me resisted the idea. The walkway was wet, the wind was strong, and he was 3 years old. But there are moments when life hands you 2 terrible choices and asks which one you can live with. I crouched, set Micah behind the inner railing, wrapped my coat around him, and pointed at the ground. "Stay right there, buddy." He grabbed my pant leg. "Daddy?" "No, I am right here. Do not go." Those words hit a place in me that had never healed. I almost stopped. I almost chose my son and let the stranger go. And anyone who says that thought makes me a bad person has never stood in the rain with 2 lives asking everything from the same pair of hands. Then Claire cried out as her grip shifted. An instinct made the decision before courage could take credit. I grabbed her forearm with both hands, planted my left foot against the railing base, and pulled. "Now, Claire." She pushed against the brace. Her shoulder rose above the rail, and slipped back. My palms burned. Again, "I cannot feel my foot." "You do not need to feel it. Just push." Micah was sobbing behind me. Claire screamed and kicked upward. I caught her under the arm, twisted my body, and dragged her across the top rail. We crashed onto the walkway in a pile of wet clothes and shaking limbs. For several seconds, nobody moved. I lay on my back trying to breathe. Micah crawled onto my chest, and Claire curled on her side with both hands covering her face. The city kept moving around us, horns in the distance, tires hissing through rain, lights blinking as if nothing had happened. That is one of the strangest things about surviving something terrible. The world does not stop to acknowledge it. Somebody somewhere is still ordering noodles, arguing over parking, folding laundry. Your life can split in half while the traffic light keeps changing on schedule. Micah touched my cheek. "Daddy hurt?" "A little." He turned to Claire, then patted her shoulder with the seriousness of a doctor. "Lady hurt?" Claire looked at him, and a broken laugh escaped her. "A little," she said. I sat up slowly. My knee had already begun swelling beneath my work pants. Claire's bare feet were scraped. Her lips blue from cold. I took off the sweatshirt beneath my work shirt and handed it to her. "Put this on. You are freezing." "I have layers." I did not. She noticed. "That is your only dry shirt." "Technically, it is my only shirt, dry or otherwise. Though we can discuss my fashion budget later." She stared at me, then pulled it over her head. The sleeves covered her hands. "Why did you do that?" she asked. "Because you looked cold." "No." "Why did you save me?" I looked at her for a long moment. "Because somebody once stayed with me when I did not deserve how patient they were." "You think I deserve saving?" I think people do not have to earn the right to survive their worst night. She lowered her eyes. You should not say things like that to strangers. Probably not. I have been told I overshare. I helped her stand, though my knee nearly folded. She caught my elbow. For the first time, she was holding me up. We need to get off this bridge, I said. Do you have somewhere safe to go? She hesitated too long. That is a no. I cannot go home. Boyfriend? Her expression hardened. Something like that. Family. Worse. I did not press. Pain makes people vulnerable, and curiosity can feel like another hand reaching into a wound. I called the one person I knew would open his door at 1 a.m. without turning kindness into an interview. Leon Brooks had been an emergency room nurse for 28 years before his back forced him into retirement. He was 59, stubborn, diabetic, and believed every crisis could be improved with tea, clean socks, and somebody minding their business. He had also been the man who showed up after my wife Denise died, brought groceries, held Micah while I signed paperwork, and sat on my kitchen floor when I admitted I was afraid to be alone. When Leon answered, his voice was thick with sleep. Somebody better be bleeding, not badly. That means yes. Can we come over? He sighed. Door is open. We took the subway because no cab driver wanted 3 soaked people, 1 crying toddler, and a man limping like he had just lost an argument with a truck. Claire sat across from us, staring at her own reflection in the dark window. Without the rain and the bridge between us, I noticed things that did not fit together. Her dress was simple, but expensive. The stitching clean. The fabric, the kind you do not find on a clearance rack. There was a pale line around her wrist where a watch had been removed, and a tiny diamond still rested in one ear while the other was bare. She kept touching her left ring finger even though there was no ring on it. Micah eventually crawled from my lap to the seat beside her. You cold? He asked. A little. He pulled off one of his dinosaur socks. I stopped him. Buddy, she cannot wear your sock. For hand, he said, annoyed by my lack of imagination. He pushed it toward Claire. She took the tiny sock and closed her fingers around it. That was the first time I saw her cry without trying to hide it. Leon lived in a ground-floor apartment in Harlem with mismatched furniture, a wall full of old family photographs, and a radiator that sounded like it had personal grievances. He opened the door wearing plaid pajama pants and 1 slipper. He looked at me, looked at Micah, then looked at Claire in my sweatshirt. I am going to need the short version. Bridge, that is not a version. She almost fell. Leon's face changed instantly. The sleep left his eyes. He stepped aside. Towels are in the bathroom. Blankets on the couch. Tea in 5 minutes. Questions tomorrow. Claire paused at the doorway. I do not want to cause trouble. Leon snorted. Trouble already knows the address. Come inside. He cleaned the cuts on her feet, wrapped my knee, checked Micah for cold stress, then placed 3 mugs of chamomile tea on the coffee table. Nobody is dying in my living room tonight, he announced. I just had the rug cleaned. It was an old joke of his, humor as a handrail, something to hold while the room stopped spinning. Claire sat wrapped in 2 blankets, her hair damp around her face. Micah climbed onto the couch beside her and handed her his toy bus. You keep, he said. Why? So not scared. Claire looked at me like she did not know what to do with that kind of generosity. I shrugged. He is reckless with his investments. Leon took Micah into the spare room and left Claire and me beneath the yellow light of a crooked floor lamp. The city sounded far away, reduced to pipes knocking and tires passing on wet pavement. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Claire said, Your wife's name was Denise? I nodded. She taught 2nd grade. She had a laugh that made strangers turn around in grocery stores. Not because it was elegant, because it sounded like a car refusing to start. Claire smiled faintly. How did the fire happen? Faulty wiring in the apartment above ours. I was working nights as a maintenance supervisor at a hotel. Denise called and said she smelled smoke. Then the line went dead. By the time I got there, the stairwell was gone. I rubbed my hands together, feeling the old burn scars along my palms even though the room was warm. I tried to go inside. Firefighters stopped me. I hated them for doing their jobs. Was Micah with her? A neighbor got him through a bathroom window. Denise did not make it. Claire stared into her tea. I am sorry. People say that because there is nothing else to say. Does it help? Sometimes. Mostly it reminds me the person saying it is willing to stand near the pain for a second. She turned the small dinosaur sock over in her hand. My mother died when I was 15. Cancer. My father treated grief like a problem for the legal department. He had her clothes removed before the funeral because he said the house needed to feel functional. Her voice was calm, but her fingers tightened around the sock. After that, everything became performance. My grades, my clothes, the people I dated, where I sat at dinner, even how long I was allowed to be sad. He said emotion made people careless. Sounds like he was scared of his own. He's not scared of anything. Everybody is scared of something. Rich people just have better doors to hide behind. Claire looked at me sharply, then laughed despite herself. You do not know who he is. No, and I am starting to suspect that is why you have not told me. She looked toward the hallway where Micah slept. My name is Claire Ashford. The name meant nothing to me at first. I had heard it somewhere. Maybe on the side of a building or in a television commercial. She washed my face, waiting for recognition that did not come. My father is Roland Ashford. That one I knew. Everybody in New York knew Roland Ashford. He owned hotels, office towers, private medical centers, and enough empty luxury apartments to house half the people sleeping in shelters. His face appeared in business magazines beneath words like visionary, dainty, and legacy. That Roland Ashford? I asked. Unfortunately, there is only one. I leaned back, careful with my knee. So you are rich. My father is rich. That is usually how inheritance works. Not anymore. She explained that Roland had arranged her engagement to Grant Holloway, the son of a political donor and investment partner. The marriage would merge two business families, calm a dispute over a waterfront development, and produce exactly the kind of wedding photographs people like Roland believed could stabilize a stock price. Claire had spent years studying art in secret, sketching in bathrooms, hotel kitchens, and the backs of cars because her father considered painting an embarrassing hobby. When she refused to marry Grant, Roland threatened to cut off her trust, remove her from the family foundation, and publicly describe her as emotionally unstable. Tonight was the engagement dinner, she said. I stood in a room with 200 people while Grant announced our wedding date. I had never agreed to marry him. What did you do? I took off the ring and put it in his champagne. I almost smiled. That is dramatic. He swallowed the champagne. Did he swallow the ring? No. But for a few seconds I hoped he would. There it was, the smallest flash of the woman buried beneath all that control. Then her face collapsed again. My father followed me into the hallway. He said if I left, I would lose my apartment, my accounts, my place on every board, everything my mother had intended for me. It told me nobody would love me once I had nothing useful to offer. That is not love. It is the only version I know. No, I said quietly. That is employment with worse boundaries. She looked at me. Then what is love? I thought about Denise, about Leon asleep down the hall, about Micah giving away a sock because he had no better tool for grief. Love is staying when there is no advantage in it. It is bringing groceries nobody asked for, changing a diaper at 3 in the morning, sitting in silence because advice would only make things louder. It is not ownership, and it is not a reward for good behavior. Claire's eyes filled again. Why did you stay on that bridge? Because you were there. That's simple? Simple is not the same as easy. We sat until the tea went cold. At some point, Claire asked whether I regretted saving her, considering the trouble that might follow. I told her I regretted the condition of my knee, my choice of shoes, and every financial decision I had made since age 19, but no, I did not regret pulling her back. She laughed, and the sound was quiet but real. Before dawn, Leon gave her the spare bedroom. I slept in the chair with Micah curled against me. My knee throbbed, my shoulder burned, and every time I closed my eyes I saw Claire's hand slipping through mine. Around 5:30 I woke to the faint click of the front door. At first I thought Leon had gone outside for the newspaper. Then I noticed the folded blankets on the couch. Claire was gone. On the coffee table she had left Micah's dinosaur sock, washed and folded, beside a single sheet of paper. Darius, thank you for treating me like a person before you knew my name. Thank you for giving me a minute when I could not imagine another year. And thank you for not asking me to owe you my life. I need to learn whether I can stand without a railing, a father, a fiancé, or a stranger holding me up. I do not know what happens next, but I am going to try to find out. Please tell Micah his bus made me brave. Claire. I read the note twice, then a third time, hoping another sentence might appear if I stared long enough. Micah woke and rubbed his eyes. Where bridge lady? She had to go. She come back? I wanted to tell him yes. Parents lie about small things all the time. Vegetables make you strong. The toy store is closed. Cartoons need sleep too. But some promises are too heavy to hand a child unless you know you can carry them. I do not know, I said. But last night she decided to stay alive. He thought about that, then nodded as if it made perfect sense. I folded the note and placed it in my wallet behind Denise's photograph, beside an expired bus pass and a receipt for a heating bill I had not paid. At the time, I thought Claire Ashford had stepped into my life for one stormy night and disappeared before sunrise. I did not know that 4 months later, I would wake in a hospital unable to lift my own son, that the Ashford family would drag my name through every gutter in New York, or that Claire would one day walk away from a fortune to knock on my door at 3:12 in the morning. All I knew was that the rain had stopped. My son needed breakfast, and somewhere in the city a woman I barely knew was trying to prove her legs could still hold her. 4 months passed after Claire walked out of Leon's apartment, and for a while I convinced myself that was where our story ended. One terrible night. One folded note. One dinosaur sock. Then 2 people moving back into separate lives because that is usually how New York works. The city lets strangers save each other at midnight and forget each other by breakfast. I kept her note in my wallet anyway. Some mornings it felt like proof that I had done one decent thing in a life full of unfinished bills. Other mornings it felt like a question I was afraid to answer, because Claire had promised she would try, not that she would succeed. And there is a painful difference between those two things. Winter settled over the city hard that year. The temperature dropped, warehouse hours were cut, and the radiator in our room began coughing up more noise than heat. I took whatever work I could find, unloading produce before sunrise, patching drywall in buildings where the tenants paid more for 1 month than I earned in 6, clearing snow from sidewalks, carrying broken furniture down narrow stairs while men half my size told me to be careful with their walls. At night, I came home smelling like plaster dust and cold metal, warmed canned soup for Micah, and made up bedtime stories about a brave little dump truck that always found its way home. Micah knew the truck was me, though he was kind enough not to say it. Kids understand more than adults like to admit. They just have the decency to let us keep our dignity. The accident happened on a Tuesday morning in February at a renovation site in Lower Manhattan. We were replacing windows in an old office building that had been bought by some investment company with a name nobody could remember and a budget that apparently did not include safe equipment. I was standing on the second level of a rolling scaffold, maybe 12 feet off the ground, tightening a metal brace while an older worker named Calvin held the base. Calvin had been in construction 30 years and could detect bad equipment the way some people smell rain. He looked up and said, "Number 7 is rusted through." I tested the bolt with my glove. "It is holding." Calvin shook his head. "That is what everything says right before it stops." I should have climbed down. I should have called the supervisor. I should have listened to the man who had kept all 10 fingers through 3 decades of dangerous work. Instead, I thought about the overdue electric bill, the daycare payment due Friday, and the fact that men who complained on temporary crews did not get called back. 2 more minutes, I said. The bolt snapped before I finished the sentence. The scaffold shifted sideways, metal screamed, and the floor dropped out from under me. Falling 12 feet does not sound like much when you say it quickly. It is not a skyscraper. It is not a bridge. But your body has no respect for measurement once gravity takes over. I remember seeing Calvin's mouth open, then the ceiling turning into the floor, then a white flash as my back hit a stack of plywood. When I woke, I was staring at hospital lights. There was a tube under my nose, a brace around my wrist, and every breath felt like somebody had wedged a screwdriver between my ribs. A nurse with pink glasses stood over me and said, "Mr. Reed, do you know where you are? Somewhere expensive." She smiled despite herself. "That is a good sign." I had 3 cracked ribs, a fractured left wrist, a mild concussion, and enough bruising to make my body look like a bad map. The doctor said I was lucky. Doctors use that word differently from regular people. To them, lucky means your injuries will not kill you. It does not mean you can pay rent, pick up your son, or keep the job that almost broke you. Leon arrived that evening with Micah bundled in a red coat 2 sizes too big. The boy climbed onto the chair beside my bed and stared at the brace. "Daddy broke?" "A little. Leon fix you," Leon snorted. I retired so I would not have to fix grown men who ignore warnings. He gave me a look. Calvin had already told him about the rusted bolt. Somehow, old men build information networks faster than government agencies. Micah placed his favorite yellow dump truck beside my pillow. "For brave," he said. I turned my face toward the window because I did not want him to see me cry. The first 2 days blurred into medicine, paperwork, and conversations with hospital staff who use phrases like workers' compensation review and pending employer verification, which sounded professional but meant no way planned to pay anything soon. On the third morning, I was half asleep when the door opened. I heard the soft scrape of shoes. Then a voice I had replayed in my head more times than I wanted to admit. "You still have terrible luck with metal structures." I turned carefully. Claire stood in the doorway wearing a cream-colored coat, her dark hair tied back, a bouquet of blue hydrangeas in one arm and a paper bag in the other. For a second, I thought the concussion had become creative. "Claire? That is usually what people call me. What are you doing here? I saw your name in a local article about the accident." There was an article? 3 paragraphs below, a story about a celebrity dog. At least I made the news. Her smile trembled. She set the flowers in a plastic water pitcher because the room had no vase, then placed the bag on the table. "Chicken soup." "I made it." "You made soup?" I followed instructions. "That does not answer the question." She took off her coat and sat beside the bed. She looked different from the woman on the bridge. Not untouched, not suddenly healed, just more present. There was color in her face and paint under one fingernail. "I moved into a small apartment in Queens," she said. "I started seeing a therapist. I enrolled in evening art classes, and I have been volunteering at a youth center twice a week." "Your father allowed that?" "My father does not know where I live." "That sounds peaceful." "It is terrifying. Sometimes those are neighbors." Her eyes lowered to my wrist. "I wanted to come sooner." "You did not know I was here." "I mean, after that night. I wrote your number down from Leon's phone. Then I stared at it for weeks. I kept thinking if I called, you might believe I was making you responsible for me. You were never my responsibility." "I know. That is why I came now." She opened the soup container. The smell was good, which surprised both of us. "I am not here because I owe you my life," she said. "I am here because I heard you were hurt and I wanted to show up." I watched her pour soup into a paper bowl. "That sounds suspiciously like staying. Do not make it sentimental. Taste this first." It needed salt. The carrots were cut into shapes no vegetable had intended, and one piece of chicken was large enough to qualify as furniture. But it was warm. I ate every bite. Claire came back the next day, then the day after that. She did not arrive with dramatic gifts or expensive solutions. She brought ordinary things. Clean socks, a cushion for my back, a cheap set of crayons for Micah, a paperback novel I never opened but liked having nearby. She sat through doctors' visits, took notes when the medication made me slow, and never once reached for a bill without asking. The first time Micah saw her, he stood in the doorway holding Leon's hand and whispered, "Bridge lady." Claire crouched in front of him. "Hello." Dinosaur sock investor. He studied her face. "You came back." Those 3 words landed harder than anything the doctors had done to me. Claire swallowed. "I did." Micah reached into his pocket and handed her a blue crayon. "For drawing." "What should I draw?" "Us." She spent the next hour on the floor beside my bed while he instructed her with the confidence of a very small director. She drew Leon too tall, me too muscular, herself with hair down to her knees, and Micah driving a yellow truck across a bridge shaped like a rainbow. When he added a stick figure beside himself and called it Mommy Claire, the room went so quiet I could hear the heating vent click. Claire did not laugh. She did not correct him either. She just smoothed his hair and said, "That is a very important picture." After Leon took Micah home, I stared at the blanket covering my legs. "I am sorry about that. Do not apologize for a child drawing what feels safe. He misses having a mother. I miss having one too." We sat with that for a while. Then Claire said, "I am not asking for a name or a place in your family." "Good, because I do not know what I am ready for." "Neither do I. That makes 2 of us. 3, she said. Micah clearly has a plan. A few days later, a hospital billing representative brought in a folder thick enough to stop a door. The total was more money than I had earned the previous year. Claire read the first page, frowned, and said, "This is absurd. That is the official hospital motto. Your workers' compensation should cover most of it." Should is a beautiful word. She looked at me. Let me take care of this. No, Darius. No, you could pay me back later if that matters. It matters now. Her expression tightened. You would rather drown in debt than accept help? I would rather my son see me keep my word. Your son would probably rather have a father who is not working himself into another hospital. That is not fair. Neither is pretending pride and dignity are the same thing. That one hit. I looked away. Claire immediately softened. I am sorry. No, you are not. I am sorry I said it like that. I took a breath that hurt my ribs. When Denise died, people gave us money, clothes, food, everything. I was grateful. But after a while, I could not tell where help ended and pity began. People looked at me like I was already broken. Like every choice I made needed to be approved by someone with a full refrigerator. I promised myself Micah would never see me become a man who waited for rescue. Claire closed the folder. Accepting help is not waiting for rescue. Maybe not to you. Then tell me how to help without taking something from you. Nobody had ever asked me that before. Most people either pushed their help into my hands or disappeared when I hesitated. Let me make payments, I said. Small ones. To the hospital? To whoever pays the hospital. She nodded slowly. All right. I found out months later that Claire had quietly negotiated the bill down, challenged duplicate charges, forced the contractor's insurer to accept part of the claim, and paid the remaining balance through a legal assistance fund that did not carry her name. At the time, all I knew was that once a week I put money into an envelope and gave it to her. The first envelope held $40. The second held $60. 1 week it held $11.80, including coins from a jar Micah thought belonged to pirates. Each time I wrote the same sentence on the front, hospital payment, more next week, Darius. Claire never told me the balance was already gone. She kept every envelope in a wooden box. Years later, she said those were the first payments she had ever received that made her feel richer instead of more powerful. I left the hospital after 9 days, moving slowly, one wrist in a brace, ribs wrapped, dignity intact, mostly because Claire had learned how to help me without announcing it. She came by Leon's apartment 3 or 4 times a week. Sometimes she brought groceries. Sometimes she brought nothing. She would sit at the kitchen table sketching while Micah colored beside her, and I practiced lifting a soup can with my injured wrist. That was our romance at first. Not candlelight or expensive dinners. Just rehabilitation exercises, burnt toast, and arguments about whether tomato soup counted as a vegetable. Claire insisted it did. I said that depended on whether ketchup counted as a smoothie. Leon told us both to stop talking. By late March, I could carry Micah again, though not for long. Claire and I started taking him to Marcus Garvey Park in the afternoons. She pushed the stroller while I walked beside her, and because I had to move slowly, we began noticing things I usually rush past. A saxophone player practicing under bare trees, old men arguing over chess, a woman feeding pigeons from a grocery bag while pretending not to enjoy their company. Do you ever think about starting over somewhere else? Claire asked one day. Every morning when rent is due, I mean really starting over. Where would I go? Somewhere with grass, a small house, a yard for Micah. You make it sound like people can buy a fresh life if they save enough. I know better than that now. She looked down at the stroller. I have been thinking about opening a studio, not a gallery, nothing polished, just a place where people can paint, sit, or talk without being asked what they can afford. That sounds like you. What sounds like you? I thought about it. A place where Micah can grow up seeing people help each other without making a performance out of it. Maybe coffee, food, something warm. You cook? I heat things with confidence. She laughed. We would need a professional. Or low standards. The idea stayed with us, though at the time it felt no more practical than moving to the moon. Then the photograph appeared. A tabloid photographer caught Claire holding Micah outside Leon's building while I struggled with the front steps behind them. The picture was taken from a low angle, making Claire look frightened, Micah look half-dressed, and me look like I was chasing them. The headline read, Ashford Harris hiding with injured single father. By noon, websites had invented a version of our lives that neither of us recognized. Some claimed Claire was paying my debts. Others said I had manipulated her after rescuing her. One article called me a former maintenance worker with a violent history, based on a police report from the night of Denise's fire when I had tried to push past firefighters. Another called Claire unstable, rebellious, and vulnerable to exploitation. The comments were worse. People who had never met us decided I was either a gold digger, a criminal, or a charity project. Claire was either a foolish rich girl or a victim too weak to understand her own choices. Nobody imagined two adults could care about each other without one purchasing the other. By evening, cameras gathered outside Leon's building. Flashes cut through the curtains. Reporters shouted questions when we tried to take Micah to daycare. One woman pushed a microphone near his face and asked whether Claire bought him toys. I knocked the microphone away. The footage was edited before sunset and posted under the title, Violent Father Attacks. Reporter. 3 contractors canceled jobs they had promised me. The daycare director asked whether Micah could stay home until things became less disruptive. Leon stood by the window muttering medical terms that were not technically threats but sounded close. Claire paced the kitchen with her phone in both hands. My father did this. You do not know that. I know how he works. He does not shout when he can make other people whisper for him. Around 6, 2 men in dark coats appeared at the door. The taller one introduced himself as Mr. Vance, head of security for Ashford Holdings. He spoke politely, which somehow made him more unpleasant. Miss Ashford, your father has asked us to escort you home. Claire stood behind me. I do not live there. Mr. Ashford is concerned for your safety. He leaked my address to the press. I cannot speak to that. Of course not. Mr. Vance looked past me as if I were furniture. Miss Ashford, this environment is not secure. This environment has a better lock than my childhood bedroom. His jaw tightened. Your father would prefer not to involve attorneys. I stepped half a pace forward. She said no. He finally looked at me. This is a family matter. Then why did you bring backup? The second man shifted his weight. Claire touched my arm. Darius, you do not have to go anywhere? I know. Her voice was low. But if I do not face him, he will keep coming through you. She turned to Mr. Vance. I will go voluntarily, but I am not surrendering my phone. And I am coming back tonight. Your father will explain the arrangements. There are no arrangements. She looked at me, apology already forming in her eyes. I will come back. I wanted to say something strong, something reassuring, but fear makes cowards of the mouth. I just nodded. I will keep the light on. She left between the 2 men. The cameras exploded outside. By midnight, her phone went straight to voicemail. Across town, Claire was taken to the Ashford penthouse overlooking Central Park, a place so high above the city that weather seemed like something happening to poorer people. Roland Ashford waited in the library beside a wall of windows. Claire told me later that he did not hug her, did not ask whether she was safe, did not mention the bridge. He looked at her jeans, her inexpensive coat, and the paint on her fingers as if she had arrived carrying a contagious disease. Grant Holloway stood near the fireplace with a drink in his hand. You look tired, he said. Claire removed her coat. You look disappointed to see me alive. Grant's smile disappeared. Roland spoke without raising his voice. Sit down. No, Claire. You dragged me here through a wall of reporters you created. I will stand. Roland clasped his hands behind his back. That man is using you. Darius did not even know who I was when he saved me, which made him useful. Now he does know. He has refused money from me at every turn. Grant laughed. That is clever. Poor men have discovered pride makes excellent bait. Claire turned toward him. You announced our wedding date without my consent. You embarrassed both families. I put a ring in your champagne. You survived. Barely, Grant said dryly. Roland struck the desk with his palm. Enough. This is not about romance. This is about judgment. You're publicly associating with a man whose history can damage this family. His wife died. He raised his son. He works until his body breaks. Which part offends the family? The part where he becomes a headline. You made him one. Roland's face hardened. I am trying to protect you. Claire stepped closer. No, you were trying to protect the version of me that obeys you. I built everything you have. You built walls and called them a home. Grant set down his glass. Claire, be reasonable. Return to the engagement. Issue a statement saying you suffered an emotional episode, and we can make this disappear. She stared at him. You want me to call my own life an episode so your investors feel comfortable? I want you to think beyond yourself. That is all I have ever done. Roland nodded toward Mr. Vance, who took Claire's phone from the table. You will remain here until you have had time to recover your perspective. Claire looked at her father. You cannot imprison me. You are free to leave once the press situation is managed. That is imprisonment with better furniture. Call it whatever you like. The bedroom door locked from the outside that night. It was the same room Claire had slept in as a teenager. Though the glow-in-the-dark stars she once stuck to the ceiling had been painted over, she sat on the floor until midnight listening to the city below. For years, Roland had convinced her that without his money she would disappear. But the strange thing was, she had never felt more invisible than when she was surrounded by everything his money could buy. At 3:12 in the morning, she opened the bathroom window, climbed onto the narrow service balcony, and crossed to the fire stairs used by staff. She wore jeans, a hooded sweatshirt, and carried one backpack. Inside were 2 shirts, her sketchbook, her mother's photograph, $37 in cash, and Micah's blue crayon. She left the engagement ring on the bathroom sink, back at Leon's apartment. I have fallen asleep in the chair with Micah across my lap when someone knocked hard enough to shake the chain. Leon came out of his room holding a baseball bat he had no business swinging with his back. I opened the door. Claire stood in the hallway soaked from rain, hair stuck to her cheeks, breathing like she had run the whole length of Manhattan. "If the light is still on," she said, "I would like to come in." I pulled the door wide. That was all. No speech, no questions. She stepped inside, and I wrapped my good arm around her. Micah woke against my chest. "Claire?" She bent and kissed the top of his head. I came back. Leon lowered the bat. "Good. Now everybody whisper. Some of us are elderly." The next morning, Claire walked into the office of the Ashford family attorneys wearing black jeans, flat shoes, and no makeup. Roland sat at the end of a polished table with Grant beside him and 6 lawyers arranged like expensive furniture. Claire placed a folder on the table. "I am renouncing my interest in the family trust, my voting shares in Ashford Holdings, and any claim to future inheritance." Roland stared at her. "You are angry. I am clear. Those documents represent hundreds of millions of dollars. Then they should be heavy enough to keep you company." One lawyer cleared his throat. Grant leaned forward. "You are throwing away your future for a man you barely know." Claire removed the engagement ring from her bag and rolled it across the table. It stopped near his hand. "No, I am throwing away the future you wrote for me." Roland stood. "Walk out of this room and you lose every protection this family provides." Claire met his eyes. "The first time I felt protected was on a bridge with a stranger who had $40 and one dry coat. He will leave when the money is gone." "The money is gone now. We will find out." She signed every page. The scratching of the pen was the loudest sound in the room. Roland watched his daughter give up the empire he had spent his life building, and for the first time, he had no number large enough to control the outcome. Claire found work at a small coffee shop in Astoria. The owner, a woman named Sophia Mendez, hired her after Claire admitted she had no experience but was willing to clean anything. For the first month, she burned milk, misread orders, and created latte art that looked less like hearts and more like internal organs. She came home smelling of espresso and bleach, dropped her tips into a jar, and complained about customers who ordered drinks with instructions longer than legal contracts. I started taking light repair jobs again, mostly painting and cabinet work. My wrists still hurt and my ribs complained whenever I laughed, which gave Claire an unfair advantage during arguments. We lived carefully. Leon let us stay while we looked for something affordable, though he pretended his reason was that Micah improved the apartment's property value. At night, Claire and I spread papers across the kitchen table and returned to the idea we discussed in the park. A small cafe and art room where nobody had to buy anything expensive to remain indoors. We found a vacant storefront in Washington Heights owned by an elderly widow named Mrs. Rosa Delgado. The space had exposed brick, broken tile, one bathroom with a door that refused to close, and a front window facing a narrow view of the George Washington Bridge. "It is perfect," Claire said. "It smells like wet wood. Character. There may be mushrooms behind the wall. Organic character." Mrs. Delgado liked Micah because he complimented her purple hat. She offered us a low rent if we repaired the space ourselves and paid a deposit by the end of the month. We counted everything we had. Claire's tips, my repair money, the little savings Leon insisted he did not need, the proceeds from selling my old wedding watch after I spent 2 days pretending I was not going to sell it. We were still several $1,000s short. Claire offered to ask Roland. "No," I said. "I did not say I would accept conditions. There are always conditions with him. People can change. Not this quickly. She looked at me. You believe strangers deserve second chances, but not fathers? I believe second chances should come after a first apology. Maybe asking is not surrender. Maybe it is exactly what he is waiting for. The argument lasted 2 days and ended with neither of us winning, which is how most honest arguments end. On the Thursday before the deposit was due, we were working late at the storefront. Leon was replacing outlets. Claire was painting one wall a deep blue-gray. Micah sat on the floor drawing bridges, and I was building a counter from salvage wood. We had borrowed a coffee maker from Sophia so Claire could practice. Around 8, a man in a dark gray coat entered. I recognized Roland Ashford immediately, though he looked different without cameras. Assistants or polished lighting, older mostly, tired. Claire stood frozen with a paintbrush in her hand. Roland looked around at the unfinished walls, the second-hand chairs, the child coloring on cardboard. "We are not open," Claire said. "I gathered that. How did you find us? You filed the business license. Of course you searched public records. It is what my lawyers do when I ask badly worded questions." I stepped closer, but Claire lifted a hand. She wanted this conversation. Roland sat at the only table that did not wobble. "Coffee," he said. Claire stared at him. "You hate coffee." "I am trying new things." She made him an Americano. It was too weak. He drank it anyway. For 15 minutes he said nothing. He watched Claire paint. Watched me measure the same board twice because my wrist was tired. Watched Micah carry crayons to each of us like a foreman distributing tools. Then he stood, placed cash beside the empty cup, and walked toward the door. Claire's face tightened. "That is it?" Roland stopped. "What did you expect?" "I do not know. An order? A threat? A lawyer hiding outside? The lawyer is in the car." "Of course he is." Roland looked at the wall she had painted. "Your mother liked that color." Claire's hand lowered. He left before she could answer. Later that night, Micah emptied the clear jar we had labeled, "Pay what you can." Beneath a few bills and coins was an envelope. Inside was a certified check large enough to cover the deposit and most of the repairs. There was no letter. Only 6 handwritten words. For the color she never stopped seeing. Our Claire sat down on the floor. She traced the edge of the check with one finger. He remembered. I sat beside her. "Looks like it. If I take this, am I letting him control me again? Did he ask for anything?" "Not yet." "Then take it as a gift. If a string appears." We cut it. Leon leaned over our shoulders. "Before cutting anything, deposit the check." Claire laughed through tears. The next morning, we signed the lease. We named the place The Next Minute, because that was all I had asked Claire to survive on the bridge. Not a lifetime, not a perfect future, just the next minute. Claire painted the sign by hand. Micah added a crooked yellow bridge beneath the words. We built a reclaimed wood counter, hung warm lights along the brick, created a small corner with art supplies, and placed an old armchair by the window for anyone who needed to sit without explaining why. Near the register, we set out the "Pay What You Can" jar. On the back wall, Claire painted 2 hands reaching toward each other, not gripping, with a small space between the fingers. "Why the gap?" I asked. "So neither hand becomes a cage." We were 3 days from opening when Grant Holloway arrived. He wore a tailored navy coat and the expression of a man stepping into a room he believed should apologize for existing. 2 photographers waited outside. "Claire," he said, looking around. "This is worse than I imagined." She kept painting a shelf. "Then your imagination needs exercise." Grant glanced at me. "Mr. Reed." "Mr. Reed." "Holloway, I hear you are opening a charity coffee shop, a cafe, funded by Roland Ashford." Claire turned around. "A private gift, without conditions." "There are always conditions with Roland. You of all people should know that." He placed a folder on the counter. Inside was a legal notice challenging our lease, claiming the building violated zoning restrictions, and that our intended support meetings constituted unlicensed mental health services. Mrs. Delgado's ownership records were also being reviewed because a development company had recently offered to purchase the block. That company was controlled by a Holloway subsidiary. Claire read the papers, then looked up. "You are buying the building to shut us down." Grant smiled. "I am protecting the neighborhood from an unsafe operation." "You do not care about this neighborhood." "I care about property value." "There it is." He leaned closer. "Come back publicly, Claire. Say the past months were the result of stress. in this embarrassing experiment, and I will withdraw every objection. Your father can restore the trust. We can repair the engagement announcement. You mean repair your reputation? Our reputation. There is no our. His eyes shifted toward Micah, who was coloring at the far table. You are prepared to sacrifice that child's stability for a fantasy? I moved between them. Leave him out of this. Grant's smile sharpened. You already involved him when you attached yourself to a woman whose life you could never understand. Claire stepped beside me. No, Grant. Darius understands my life better than you ever did, because he knows the difference between helping someone stand and deciding where they are allowed to walk. Grant closed the folder. The inspection is Monday. You will fail. The lease will be frozen. The landlord will panic. And your little project will end before it opens. When it does, remember I offered you an easy way out. He walked toward the door, paused for the photographers, and arranged his face into something concerned. That night, Claire and I sat alone inside the unfinished cafe. The warm lights were on, but the room suddenly felt colder. Mrs. Delgado called twice, terrified she might lose the building. Leon found 3 electrical issues that could delay the inspection. My workers' compensation case had been denied that morning, leaving us with no cushion. Claire stared at Grant's legal notice until the words blurred. Maybe he is right, she said. About what? Maybe I dragged all of you into a war that belonged to me. Grant brought the war here. Because I came here. Claire, look at me. She did. On that bridge, you thought disappearing would solve everybody else's problems. Do not dress the same thought in nicer clothes. Her eyes filled. What if we lose everything? I reached across the counter and took her paint-stained hand. Then we lose it standing where we chose to stand. Before she could answer, someone knocked on the glass. Outside, in the cold, stood Calvin from the construction site, Sophia from the coffee shop, 3 of Leon's former hospital co-workers, 2 women from Claire's art class, and half a dozen neighbors we had barely met. Calvin held a toolbox. Sophia carried an espresso machine. One neighbor had building permits. Another was an electrician, Mrs. Delgado arrived last, wearing the same purple hat Micah loved, waving the legal notice like she intended to hit somebody with it. That rich boy thinks he can scare an old Dominican woman out of her own building, she said. He is about to learn I have survived 3 landlords, 2 husbands, in a New York City plumbing department. For the next 48 hours, the cafe filled with people. They replaced wiring, repaired tile, installed emergency lights, filed permits, researched zoning rules, and found something Grant had missed. The block was protected under a neighborhood commercial preservation agreement signed 11 years earlier. Holloway Development could purchase property there, but it could not remove an active community serving business without a public hearing. The only problem was that we were not active yet. To qualify, we had to open before Monday's inspection. Sunday night, with 1 day remaining, we hung the last shelf. Claire placed blue hydrangeas near the window. Micah taped his crooked bridge sign beneath the register. Leon tested the lights. Mrs. Delgado handed me the key. At 6 the next morning, the next minute opened its door for the first time. The bell above the frame gave a weak little ring. For 30 seconds, nobody entered. Then Calvin came in and ordered coffee. Sophia arrived behind him. The neighbors followed. A taxi driver stopped after seeing the lights. A mother brought her daughter in from the cold. By 9, every chair was filled. Grant arrived at 10 with a city inspector and 2 attorneys. He stepped inside expecting an empty room and found the line at the counter. Children drawing at the art table, old men drinking coffee, and Mrs. Delgado explaining zoning law to anyone unfortunate enough to stand near her. The inspector checked the exits, wiring, fire extinguishers, sinks, permits, and occupancy limits. Grant followed him closely, pointing out every scratch and exposed screw. I watched Claire serve coffee without looking at him. She was pale but steady. After nearly 2 hours, the inspector closed his clipboard. There is one problem, he said. Grant's expression brightened. The entire room went silent. The inspector pointed toward the wall behind the counter. A fire safety sign was mounted half an inch below the required height. Grant let out a breath that sounded almost like laughter. Leon took a screwdriver from his pocket, raised the sign, and secured it in 30 seconds. The inspector measured again. Approved. The room erupted. People clapped. Somebody rang the doorbell repeatedly. Micah climbed onto a chair and shouted, We opened as if he had personally defeated city bureaucracy. Grant stood near the doorway, his face drained of color. Claire approached him holding the legal notice. "You offered me an easy way out," she said. "I found a harder way forward." She tore the notice once down the center, then handed the pieces back to him. It was not legally meaningful, but it was deeply satisfying. Grant leaned close enough that only we could hear him. "You think this is over?" "No," Claire said. "I think this is public." She nodded toward the customers holding phones. Every threat, every demand, every attempt to force her back had been heard by half the neighborhood. Grant looked around, finally understanding that the room he had dismissed as small had become a witness. He left without speaking. Roland entered 20 minutes later. He had no entourage, no cameras, and no gray coat. He stood at the back, watching Claire move through the cafe with a towel over her shoulder and paint still under her nails. She saw him but did not stop working. He ordered the same weak Americano. This time she made it properly. He took one sip and said, "Better. Everything improves with practice, so I am learning." He placed a folded document on the counter. It was a copy of the Ashford Foundation's updated bylaws. Roland had removed Claire's name from every mandatory family obligation, converted the money he had given us into an unconditional community grant, and added a provision banning donors from controlling the personal decisions of recipients. "Why?" Claire asked. Roland looked around the crowded room. "Because Grant told me this place would fail, and I realized I wanted him to be wrong more than I wanted to be obeyed." It was not an apology. Not quite. But it was the first sentence Roland had ever spoken that did not place himself at the center. Claire nodded. "You can sit down." He did. By sunset, the cafe smelled of cinnamon, coffee, wet coats, and new wood. Micah fell asleep in the armchair with a crayon in his hand. Claire stood by the window looking toward the distant bridge. I joined her. "We did it," she whispered. "We opened a door." "That sounds smaller. It is bigger." She rested her head against my shoulder. For the first time, I let myself believe the worst part might be behind us. I was wrong. At 9:17 that night, after the last customer left, Leon found a plain envelope pushed beneath the door. There was no return address. Inside was a photograph taken on the night of the bridge. It showed me reaching for Claire while Micah was pressed against my chest, but the angle made it look as though I had followed her there. On the back, someone had written one sentence in black ink. "Ask Darius why he was already on the bridge before Claire arrived." Claire read it twice. Then she looked at me, waiting. The truth was, there was something about that night I had never told her. Something I had hidden because I did not know whether it mattered, and because admitting it would force me to reopen the most painful part of Denise's death. I took the photograph from her hand and felt the room tilt beneath me. "Claire," I said, "there is something you need to know." "Claire," I said, "there is something you need to know." She did not move. She just stood beneath the warm lights of the next minute with the photograph between us. Her face calm in that dangerous way people get when fear has gone so deep it no longer knows how to show itself. Leon was near the door, still holding the empty envelope, and Micah slept in the armchair with his shoes half off, unaware that one sentence written in black ink had just reached into the happiest day of our lives and pulled the floor loose. Claire looked at the picture again. "Were you waiting for me that night?" "No." "Then why would somebody ask that?" "Because I was supposed to meet someone on the bridge." Her eyes narrowed. "Who?" I looked toward Micah, then lowered my voice. "A man named Raymond Keller. He was the superintendent of the building where Denise died." Claire's expression changed, not with anger yet, but with the sudden understanding that the story she knew had another room hidden behind it. I had spent 4 years refusing to open that room because every time I touched the door, I could smell smoke. "The official report said faulty wiring caused the fire," I continued. "What I never told you was that the wiring had been reported 3 times before the fire. Tenants complained about sparks in the walls, outlets getting hot, lights cutting out. Raymond sent repair requests to the company that owned the building, but the company was preparing the property for redevelopment. They did not want a full electrical replacement on the books, so somebody ordered temporary patchwork and told him to stop filing complaints." Claire sat slowly at the nearest table. "Which company?" I did not answer quickly enough. Her face drained of color. "Darius." "Which company owned the building?" "Holloway Urban Development." The words seemed to strike the glass walls and come back at us. Grant Holloway's family did not simply have money tied to Claire's arranged engagement. They owned apartment buildings. construction companies, political consulting firms, and a reputation for turning neglected neighborhoods into luxury developments. Their advertisements always showed clean sidewalks and smiling couples holding coffee. They never showed the families who had lived there before the new windows went in. Claire stared at me. You knew Grant's company was connected to Denise's death? I knew his family company owned the building. I did not know Grant personally. And I definitely did not know who you were on the bridge. Why did you not tell me after you found out? Because what was I supposed to say? Hello. I saved you without knowing your name. But now that I know you are engaged to the son of the company I blame for my wife's death, please believe those two things have nothing to do with each other. You could have trusted me. I barely trusted myself. That was the truth, and it was not a flattering one. After Claire told me who she was at Leon's apartment, I had spent half the night wondering whether the universe had brought her to me for some reason, and the other half hating myself for wondering. I had saved her because she was falling, nothing more. But once I learned the name Ashford and its connection to Holloway, every memory of that night became contaminated by suspicion. Had I held on because I was a decent man, or because some angry part of me recognized an opportunity before my conscious mind did? I knew the answer, but grief is a talented prosecutor. It can take any good act and question the motive until kindness feels like evidence. Claire folded her hands on the table. Tell me about Raymond. I sat across from her. My ribs had healed, but in that moment they seemed to tighten around my lungs again. 2 weeks after the fire, Raymond disappeared. The police said he left the state. I thought he had run because he blamed himself. Then, 4 months ago, the night I found you, he called me from a blocked number. He said he had copies of inspection reports, emails, rollback, and invoices showing Holloway managers approved cosmetic repairs instead of replacing the wiring. He told me to meet him near the pedestrian entrance of the bridge at 12:30. Leon frowned. You took Micah to meet a frightened whistleblower after midnight? The babysitter canceled. I thought Raymond would hand me an envelope and leave. You thought badly, Leon said. I've established that. Claire glanced at the photograph. Did Raymond show up? No. I waited 20 minutes. I called the number back, but he was disconnected. Then I started walking home and saw you. So whoever took this photograph may have been watching Raymond, or watching you. We both looked toward the dark window. The cafe that had felt like a refuge an hour earlier now seemed exposed, every reflection possibly hiding a camera. Claire turned the photograph over. Grant knew about the building. His company fought every claim after the fire. Their attorney said the tenants had overloaded the circuits, and that Denise must have left something running. My voice tightened. They blamed a dead woman because she could not argue back. Claire reached for my hand, then stopped herself halfway, perhaps unsure whether comfort would feel like pity. I closed the distance and took hers. I did not tell you because I did not want Denise's death hanging over us like a debt you had to pay. I said, you did not cause the fire. You did not know me. You were trapped by the same families in a different way. But my father partnered with them. That still does not make it yours. It makes it part of the world I benefited from. There is a difference between responsibility and guilt. She gave me a sad look. You sound like someone who has spent years trying to learn that. I am a slow student. Leon placed the envelope on the table. This is not only about the past. Somebody sent this tonight because the cafe opened and Grant lost control. The message is supposed to turn you against each other. Claire nodded. Then we do not give him what he wants. We also do not ignore it, I said. Raymond may still be alive. At 7 the next morning, while Leon watched Micah, Claire and I took the photograph to a former detective named Marisol Vega, one of Leon's old emergency room friends. Marisol had worked fraud and public corruption cases before retiring early after what she described as a philosophical disagreement with a police captain and what Leon described as throwing a stapler at him. She examined the picture under a desk lamp in the back office of her small investigative agency. This was not taken by a random tourist, she said. Long lens, stable angle, timestamp removed. Somebody was documenting the scene from the Manhattan side. Can you identify the camera? Claire asked. Not from a print. But whoever sent it made a mistake. She pointed to a faint reflection in a wet metal support behind me. It showed the front end of a dark SUV and a partial sequence of numbers on the license plate. People forget rain is a mirror. Claire leaned closer. That looks like an Ashford security vehicle. Your father's? I asked. The fleet was shared with Holloway executives during joint events. Marisol scanned the photograph and enlarged the reflection. 3 numbers and 1 letter became visible. By noon, she had matched them to a black Chevrolet Suburban registered to a private security contractor called Meridian Risk Group. The same company employed Mr. Vance, the man who had come to Leon's apartment to collect Claire. The vehicle record showed the Suburban had received a parking citation near the bridge at 12:18 on the night Claire tried to jump. Claire called her father. Roland answered on the 3rd ring. I wondered when you would call. Did you have security following me the night of the engagement dinner? Silence. Dad, you were upset. Grant said you might behave unpredictably. Did you order them to follow me? I authorized Vance to ensure you were safe. Claire stood so still that even her breathing seemed controlled. They watched me climb over a bridge railing. I was told they lost visual contact. They took a photograph of Darius holding me over the river. Roland did not answer. Claire's voice sharpened. Your people stood close enough to photograph my worst moment, and the stranger carrying his child was the one who ran to me. I did not know that. You never asked. Claire, listen to me. No, you listen. Somebody connected to that security team sent us the photograph last night. The message referred to Darius being on the bridge before I arrived. Another silence. Longer this time. When Roland spoke again, his voice had changed. Do not discuss this with anyone else until I arrive. Claire laughed once, without humor. That sentence is why I discuss things with other people now. She ended the call. Roland arrived at Marisol's office 40 minutes later with Mr. Yves Vance and 2 attorneys. Marisol refused to let the attorneys into the back room until they agreed the meeting would be recorded. Roland looked exhausted, his usual control stripped down to the frame. Mr. Vance remained near the door. I recognized him from Leon's apartment, but now something about the angle of his face bothered me. I had seen him before that night, not in person, but in security footage from the apartment fire. He had been standing beside a Holloway executive near the building entrance while firefighters worked. You were there, I said. Vance looked at me without expression. Where? The night my wife died. Roland turned toward him. Vance's jaw shifted. Meridian provided risk services for the property owner. Risk services, I said. Is that what you call watching families burn from across the street? Roland raised a hand. Mr. Rao. Reed, I understand you are angry. No, you understand how anger looks from the other side of a table. Claire placed the photograph before her father. Tell us everything. Roland looked at Vance. Did your team take this? A contractor did. Why? Mr. Y. Holloway requested surveillance after Miss Ashford left the dinner. Grant requested it? He was concerned she would speak to the press or contact competitors. Claire stared at him. I was not a person to him. I was a leaking document. Vance said nothing. Roland's face hardened. Why did your team fail to intervene on the bridge? The operative lost sight of Miss Ashford when she entered the pedestrian approach. By the time he repositioned, Mr. Reed had already pulled her over. That is a lie, Marisol said. She tapped the timestamp recovered from the photograph metadata. The first image was taken 41 seconds before Darius reached Claire. Your operative had enough time to call emergency services. Vance glanced at the attorneys. One of them whispered something to Roland. Claire stepped toward Vance. Who sent this photograph to the cafe? I do not know. You expect us to believe that? The original files were stored on Meridian servers. Several people had access, including Grant, Roland said. It was not a question. Vance looked away. That small movement was the first crack. Marisol saw it too. Mr. Vance, you may want to choose carefully who you protect. A surveillance contractor photographed a person in immediate danger, failed to call for help, and later used the image in an intimidation campaign. That is more than bad public relations. Vance's face remained controlled, but his hand tightened around the back of a chair. Grant Holloway requested to file 3 days ago. Claire closed her eyes. Roland sank into the chair opposite us, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked like a father instead of a corporation wearing a suit. I told Grant to manage the press, he said. I did not tell him to threaten you. You gave him access to the people who could, Claire replied. You taught him that controlling me was a reasonable goal. You only object now because he used your methods without your permission. Roland flinched. There are truths people reject because they are false, and there are truths they reject because they fit too well. This one fit him perfectly. I placed both hands on the table. Where is Raymond Keller? Vance's eyes moved toward me. I do not know. He called me the night of the bridge. He said he had evidence about the fire. Mr. Keller signed a confidentiality agreement years ago. Dead men do not need confidentiality agreements. Nobody said he was dead. Then where is he? Vance hesitated. Roland looked at him. Answer. After the fire investigation, Holloway relocated him to a company property in Pennsylvania. He was paid to remain silent. Paid? My voice rose. My wife died, 6 tenants were injured, and you paid the superintendent to disappear? Meridian handled transportation. I did not negotiate the agreement. You keep describing your hands like they were not attached to you. Marisol requested the Pennsylvania address. Vance refused until Roland turned to one of the attorneys and said, "Give it to her." That was the moment the old alliance between Roland and the Holloways began to break. Not because Roland had suddenly become good, and not because guilt washed his past clean, but because for the first time the damage had a face he could not look away from. His daughter outside a bridge railing while the system he built stood nearby and documented it. We found Raymond 2 days later in a small town outside Scranton, living in a motel owned through a Holloway shell company. He was 62, thin, and sick from years of drinking. When he opened the door and saw me, he started crying before I said a word. I tried to come that night, he said. They found out. Who? Grant's father died before the fire case closed, but Grant took over the legal cleanup. Meridian men met me before I reached the bridge. They took the documents and put me on a bus. They said if I contacted you again, they would accuse me of falsifying inspection reports. Why call me after 4 years? Because I saw Grant Holloway on television announcing his engagement to Claire Ashford, and I realized those families were joining everything together. Money, buildings, foundations, politicians. Nobody would ever reopen the fire once the merger happened. Raymond stepped aside and let us into the room. The walls smelled of cigarettes and old carpet. From beneath the mattress, he removed a flash drive wrapped in plastic. I kept a copy. Claire stared at him. You let Darius believe you disappeared with the evidence. I was afraid. So was he. Raymond lowered his head. I wanted to hate him. Part of me had practiced hating him for 4 years. But standing there, looking at a sick man trapped inside his own cowardice, hatred felt less satisfying than I had imagined. Why did you choose the bridge? I asked. The cameras. I thought meeting in public would protect us. It almost killed someone else. Raymond looked at Claire, recognition slowly spreading across his face. You were the girl. I was. He sat heavily on the bed. God forgive me. Claire's voice was quiet. God can decide later. Right now. Tell the truth. The flash drive contained repair requests, electrical inspection photographs, internal emails, and invoices showing Holloway Urban Development had received a $480,000 estimate to replace the building's wiring 6 months before the fire. Instead, a regional manager approved $12,000 for surface repairs, replacement outlet covers, and fresh paint. One email warned that a full replacement would delay the planned tenant relocation and luxury conversion. Another instructed staff to mark the electrical complaints as resolved. The final email came from Grant Holloway himself, who had recently joined the company after business school. Keep capital expenses minimal until vacancy targets are met. Do not authorize systems replacement without executive approval. It did not say, let someone die. People like Grant were careful enough not to write sentences like that. They wrote clean, efficient language. Then let dangerous buildings translate into smoke. Raymond also had a voice recording from the week after the fire. Grant told him that if inspectors learned the wiring complaints had been ignored, the company would blame unauthorized tenant modifications and claim Raymond failed to report them properly. You can accept our protection, Grant said on the recording, or you can become the reason 6 families have nowhere to live. I listened to that sentence 3 times. The anger that rose in me was not hot. Hot anger burns quickly. This was cold, heavy, and precise. Claire stood beside me with one hand covering her mouth. You used the same language with me, she whispered. Protection. Roland's attorneys immediately wanted to negotiate privately. Grant's representatives offered compensation, a public statement, and an agreement to preserve the next minute if we surrendered the evidence. The number they offered was large enough to buy the cafe, the building, and every unpaid hour of my life. I stared at the proposal on Marisol's desk. For one dangerous minute, I imagined accepting it. I imagined a house with a yard, a college fund for Micah, a bedroom where the radiator worked quietly, a future where I never climbed another scaffold. Then I imagined Denise hearing that Grant had paid me to close the same door he had closed on her. Claire seemed to read the thought on my face. Whatever you choose, I will understand. Would you? No, she admitted. But I would try. I pushed the proposal back across the desk. Tell them the price changed. The Holloway attorney leaned forward. Mr. Pace, read. This offer is more generous than any court award you are likely to receive. I am not selling the evidence. Everyone says that before seeing the final number. Then your clients have spent too much time with the wrong people. What do you want? The fire investigation reopened. Every affected tenant contacted. The surveillance records released. And Grant Holloway answering questions where cameras cannot be turned off. That is not a settlement. Correct. The story broke 3 days later through an investigative reporter Marisol trusted. We did not sell an exclusive interview or pose for photographs outside the cafe. Raymond gave a sworn statement. The former tenants confirmed years of electrical complaints, and digital experts verified the emails and recording. The city reopened the fire inquiry. State investigators searched Holloway offices in Meridian Risk Group. News vans surrounded the next minute again, but this time the reporters were not asking whether Claire bought mica toys. They were asking why a property company ignored hazardous wiring, why a witness had been relocated, and why a security operative watched a suicidal woman from a distance without calling for help. Grant appeared on television outside his attorney's office, hair perfect, coat buttoned, outrage arranged carefully across his face. These accusations are a coordinated attempt by a disgruntled former employee and individual seeking financial gain, he said. I watched from the cafe with Claire, Leon, Mrs. Delgado, Calvin, and half the neighborhood. Grant continued. Mr. Reed's presence on the bridge raises serious questions about whether the alleged rescue was manipulated for future leverage. The room erupted. Mrs. Delgado called him a word that caused Micah to ask 3 follow-up questions. Claire reached for the remote, but I stopped her. Let him finish. Grant smiled at the cameras. The public deserves facts, not emotional theater. Then the reporter played the emergency call records. A cyclist had called 911 after seeing me run toward Claire. The timestamp proved I had approached only after she climbed over the railing. Transit records confirmed I had come directly from work. The parking citation placed Grant's surveillance vehicle at the bridge before either of us arrived, and the recovered photograph showed his operative tracking Claire from the engagement dinner. Grant's attempt to accuse me did something the evidence alone had not yet done. It made people angry. The man who had allowed dangerous wiring to remain in occupied apartments was now accusing the person who had pulled his former fiancé to safety. Even people who had doubted us could recognize cruelty when it spoke too confidently. Grant was charged months later with obstruction, witness intimidation, conspiracy to suppress safety records, and financial crimes uncovered during the investigation. Meridian lost its licenses in 2 states. Mr. Vance cooperated in exchange for a reduced sentence. A decision Roland called cowardly until Claire reminded him that cooperation was how the truth had reached daylight. The reopened fire case concluded that the electrical failure began inside a wall identified as dangerous 5 months before Denise died. Holloway Urban Development had knowingly deferred replacement to protect the redevelopment schedule. I received a formal apology from the city. Those cities are strange things to receive apologies from. A letter does not have a face, and it cannot sit beside you when smoke returns in dreams. The tenants receive compensation. Raymond entered a witness protection arrangement and treatment program. I did not forgive him immediately. I am not sure forgiveness is something you do once. Some mornings I understood his fear. Other mornings I wanted him to carry every second I had spent blaming myself. Both feelings were true. Roland's role became the subject of a separate investigation. There was no evidence he knew about the wiring or the witness relocation, but he had authorized Claire's surveillance, approved the partnership with Holloway, and built the kind of culture where control was praised as protection. His board asked him to step aside temporarily. For a man who had spent his life believing his name was a building nobody could shake. The humiliation was brutal. He came to the cafe one evening after closing, without a driver, carrying no folder and making no attempt to appear strong. Claire was wiping the counter. I was checking the fire extinguisher, something I did every night now, whether it needed checking or not. Roland stood inside the door. May I come in? Claire looked at him for a long moment. You already did. I mean into your life. She set down the towel. That is not a question you get answered once. He nodded. I understand. Do you? I am trying. He turned to me. Mr. Bice, yeah, Reed. I owe you an apology. You owe a lot of people more than that. Yes. His voice cracked slightly, and he looked almost surprised by it. I spent years believing control was the same as care because control produced measurable results. Buildings opened, deals closed, problems disappeared. Then my daughter nearly disappeared too, and my people recorded it as a risk event. Claire's eyes filled, but she did not rescue him from the discomfort. That was one of the boundaries she had learned, allowing people to feel the weight of what they had done. Roland continued. I cannot undo the night on the bridge or the fear I taught her to carry. I cannot return your wife. I can only stop using money to decide when consequences end. He placed a single key on the counter. What is that? Claire asked. The deed to this building. Mrs. Corral. Delgado had quietly agreed to sell after receiving an offer from Roland's foundation. Claire's face hardened immediately. No. There are no conditions. That is what you said about the first check. The deed is not in your name or mine. It belongs to a community trust controlled by the cafe staff. Mrs. Howe 4. Delgado, 2 neighborhood residents, and an independent nonprofit. I have no voting rights. I looked at him. Why? Because the correct use of power may be giving it away before someone has to take it from you. Claire did not touch the key. This does not fix us. I know. You do not get to buy forgiveness. I know. You may never get back what you lost. Roland nodded. Then I will learn to live without demanding a return. He left the key and walked out. Claire stood behind the counter staring at it. Do you think he meant it? She asked. Tonight. Maybe. That is not enough. No. But it is a next minute. She gave me a tired smile. You always bring everything back to that. We pay for the sign. I intend to use it. The cafe changed after the investigation. People came because they had seen us on television, but many stayed because the next minute did not feel like a place built for attention. It still smelled like cinnamon and old wood. The espresso machine still complained every morning. Micah still believed napkins should be folded into animals even when customers needed them for practical purposes. Claire started a Thursday night circle for anyone carrying grief, panic, shame, or the kind of tiredness sleep does not solve. We made one rule. Nobody had to tell the whole story to earn a seat. Some people spoke for an hour. Some sat silently for 6 weeks before saying their names. Leon made tea and pretended not to listen, which was his version of listening very carefully. A former tenant from Denise's building came one night carrying a photograph of her kitchen before the fire. Another brought a smoke-stained children's book. We created a small wall called Letters Never Sent. People wrote to parents, partners, younger versions of themselves, and people they had lost. I avoided that wall for months. Then, one night, after Claire and Micah had gone upstairs, I sat at the counter with a blank sheet of paper and wrote Denise's name. I told her I was sorry I had mistaken suffering for loyalty. I told her Micah still laughed with his entire body, just like she did. I told her a woman named Claire had come into our lives carrying blue paint and too much fear, and that loving her had not pushed Denise out. It had only taught me the heart could build another room without demolishing the first. I folded the letter and placed it on the wall. I did not feel healed. I felt honest, which may be the closest thing most people ever get. Claire and I did not become a perfect couple after Grant was arrested. That would have been easier to tell and harder to believe. We argued about money, parenting, privacy, and whether I was physically capable of fixing every broken object in the building. I was not, though evidence rarely changed my opinion. Claire sometimes panicked when Roland called unexpectedly. I sometimes woke from dreams convinced I smelled burning wires. There were nights she slept on the couch because I had shut down emotionally. And mornings I found her sitting on the bathroom floor because an article about the trial had dragged her back into the penthouse. Love did not erase those things. It gave them somewhere to happen without becoming the end. One Tuesday afternoon, smoke rose from a pan in a cafe kitchen after Claire forgot to turn down the burner. The alarm sounded, and for half a second, I was back outside the apartment building, hearing windows break while firefighters held me away from Denise. My chest locked. The room narrowed. Then Micah called. Dad? I breathed in for 4 counts. Held it, breezed out. Claire, cut the gas. Leon, take Micah to the front door. I covered the pan, removed it from the heat, and opened the vent. The smoke thinned. Nothing burned except onions and one towel. Claire leaned against the wall, pale. I am sorry. I placed my hand on her shoulder. It happened. We handled it. This is not that night. She nodded, then repeated it for me. This is not that night. We stood there breathing together while Leon complained that perfectly good onions had died for our emotional growth. A year after the next minute opened, Claire and I were married beneath the George Washington Bridge at 3:12 in the afternoon. We chose 3:12 because that was the time she had climbed out of her father's penthouse and returned to Leon's apartment. The moment she stopped running only away from something and began running toward a life she had chosen. It was not a large wedding. Claire wore a simple white dress and carried blue hydrangeas. I wore a navy suit Leon insisted made me look employable. Micah carried the rings in a small wooden box and warned us 3 separate times not to drop them because rings were expensive and rivers were deep. Mrs. Delgado sat in the front row wearing her purple hat. Calvin cried openly and blamed the wind. Sophia provided coffee strong enough to restart a stopped heart. Roland stood at the back until Claire looked at him and nodded toward an empty chair. It was not complete forgiveness. It was permission to sit. Sometimes that is the first honest form of reconciliation. When it was my turn to speak, I looked at Claire and realized every prepared sentence sounded too clean for what we had survived. The first time I held your hand, I said, I was trying to keep you from falling. For a long time, I thought that was what love meant, holding tight enough that nothing could be taken. But you taught me that love is not a grip. It is a hand beside yours, close enough to reach, loose enough to let you walk. I promise I will stay when the bills come, when the smoke returns in my head, when fear makes us difficult, and when ordinary life is so ordinary we forget it is the miracle we asked for. Claire smiled through tears. I used to believe love was the reward you receive for being useful, she said. Then a stranger with no dry coat and a crying child treated me like my life mattered before he knew what I could offer. Darius, I promise not to turn care into control, not to confuse fear with protection, and not to disappear when shame tells me I am too much. I promise to keep choosing the next minute with you, then the one after that, for as long as we are given. Micah lifted the ring box. Can we do the rings before somebody falls in love too much? Everybody laughed. We exchanged rings beneath steel cables carrying thousands of strangers between 2 shores. That evening, the reception filled the cafe with music, cinnamon waffles, children running between tables, and people who had once entered alone now sitting together. Roland gave Micah a book he had commissioned from one of Claire's art students. The cover showed a small boy, a man, and a woman crossing a bridge with a yellow truck beneath them. Inside he had written, "For Micah, who understood before the rest of us that warmth is something you share." He did not make a speech. He put an envelope into the pay-what-you-can jar and left before anyone could thank him publicly. That was his new way of learning not to stand in the center of every good thing. Near midnight, Claire and I sat beside the window while Micah slept across 2 chairs. The bridge lights stretched over the dark river. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not been there? She asked. Somebody else might have seen you. What if nobody did? I looked at her. Then I am grateful we do not have to live inside that question. She rested her head on my shoulder. You saved me. You chose to reach back. You always correct that sentence, because it matters. The truth is, Claire did not owe me her life because I pulled her from the bridge, and I did not owe her love because she returned when I was injured. Neither of us rescued the other once and finished the job. We kept doing smaller things, making soup, answering calls, apologizing badly, trying again, checking the gas, paying bills, sitting through silence. That was the real second chance. Not one dramatic moment, but thousands of ordinary moments where leaving would have been easier and staying remained a choice. Grant eventually accepted a plea agreement and served time in federal prison. Some people said the sentence was too short for the lives his decisions damaged. Others argued he had never intended for anyone to die and should not be judged for the fire itself. Roland resigned as chief executive and placed a large portion of his holdings into independently managed housing safety funds. Critics called it reputation repair. Supporters called it accountability. Claire called it a beginning and refused to call it forgiveness. Raymond testified, entered recovery, and wrote me a letter every month. For nearly a year I did not answer. Then one winter morning, I sent him 3 words. I am still here. It was not absolution. It was the truth. The next minute remains open today. The coffee is better. Claire's latte hearts finally look like hearts. And Micah, now older, charges customers 25 cents for drawings that are worth significantly less but sell because he has inherited his mother's confidence. On the wall beside letters never sent hangs a wooden board that says, "I stayed because." People have written hundreds of answers beneath it. Because of my daughter. Because spring has not arrived yet. Because my dog needs breakfast. Because I promised my brother. Because a stranger sat beside me. Because I want to see who I become. My answer is simple. I stayed because Micah needed a father. Because Denise taught me love before I understood loss. Because Claire reached back. And because sometimes the next minute contains a door, the last one did not. But there is one question Claire and I still disagree about. She believes Roland deserves a chance to become a real father after everything he did. I believe change matters. But power should not erase consequences. And a good act at the end does not rewrite the harm that came before it. Maybe we're both right. Maybe forgiveness and accountability are not opposite sides of the bridge. Maybe they are two cables holding the same weight. So tell me what you think. Was Claire right to let Roland back into her life? Or should some forms of control cost a parent that relationship forever? Did Grant receive justice? Or did wealth protect him even after the truth came out? And if you were in my position, would you have taken the settlement and protected your child? Or exposed everything no matter what it cost? Leave your honest opinion in the comments. Because stories like this are not really about rich families or court cases. They are about the choices ordinary people make when fear, dignity, love, and justice all demand different things. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who may need one more reason to hold on. Like the video and subscribe. Because sometimes one voice, one open door, or one person refusing to walk away can change the entire direction of a life.